Hi, my name is James. Welcome to King's Fine Woodworking. Today I am going to try to build a couple of mallets from the hardest and the softest woods on the planet. Sort of. More on that later. To start with, we're going to make the handle from the first one from a wood called Black Ebony. This is not just any ebony. This one's very special and very, very rare. And I'm going to make the head from the first mallet from another very rare timber. It is called Australian Buloke. Now, this was once measured and reported as the hardest species on the planet with a Janka hardness scale of around 5,060 pounds of force. Subsequent testing with different trees and pieces of wood in various labs around the world have shown that the average is actually less than that, but it's still an extraordinarily hard lumber. For the second Thor's hammer, we're going exactly the opposite direction, and this one I'm going to make both the handle and the head from balsa. This is one of the lower density balsas. You can actually buy it in various densities. And this wood is actually about 200 times softer than the Australian Buloke. One of the clades, or biological classification systems, that Buloke belongs to is angiosperm, and that basically means that it's a flowering tree that produces fruit, which puts it into the category of hardwoods. It has such a beautiful interlocking grain pattern, and even exhibits some chatoyance, especially when it's finished. Unlike the hardwoods that we have here in North America, this tree doesn't have regular broad leaves. It actually has what are called scales. Scales are very similar to needles. Needles are actually more cylindrical and round, and scales are smaller and flatter, and they're overlapping. Most people have seen these before because it's what grows on juniper and cedar trees. The Buloke doesn't grow very big. In fact, it's usually between about 15 and 45 feet tall. And it's an extremely slow-growing tree. It doesn't even reach maturity for 100 years, and they often live to see their 400th birthday. Seeing the lumber for sale is very unusual, and in fact it's pretty much impossible to get in the United States. In fact, it's a crime in Australia to cut it down, and it's classified as endangered throughout the country. So it's natural to wonder where I got mine.
If you enjoy any of the content that we put out, we would really appreciate it if you would click the subscribe button and then hit that notification bell. It really helps the channel grow, and we appreciate it.
I've been woodworking now for about 39 years, and in all that time, I have only ever managed to get Buloke twice. The most recent time, which is what this comes from, it was basically being used as a support, columnar type supports for a home. Judging from the size of the timbers that were holding up this home, they were probably 200 to 300 years old, and the home itself was built about 250 years ago. So this tree was actually in existence in the late 1500s when it was still growing, and that puts it probably 20-30 years before pilgrims came to the New World here on the Mayflower back in the 1600s. You can still occasionally get large pieces like this. When you do, they sell for usually $350 to $500 per kilogram. They're not really sold by the board feet, it's just by weight. And then shipping is pretty high too. It can cost a couple $100 just to have a piece shipped here from Australia. But if you're like me and you're an avid collector of wood species from all over the world, then it's well worth it, and this is definitely a piece that's worth having in your collection, or at least it was to me.
And at one point it was very abundant in Australia, but due to overharvesting over the last several hundred years, it's become really quite rare. There's an interesting concept that goes around on the internet when people are talking about extraordinarily hard woods, like perhaps Buloke or ironwood or quebracho, which is known as axe breaker, and that's that the woods are so hard that you can barely cut them or work them or things like that. But as someone who works with really hard exotic woods all the time, I can tell you that just simply isn't true. No wood, no matter what, is any match for modern power tools or modern saw blades, sharpened steel. It just cuts right through it. Really makes no difference. There's a difference, of course, if we're talking about a species like balsa, especially this low-density balsa. This stuff is so lightweight, so phenomenally soft that when you're cutting through it with a saw, it feels like you're just cutting through air. You don't really even notice or feel any resistance at all. It's pretty incredible stuff. One particular sample of Buloke was once measured at 5,060 on the Jenka scale, whereas Balsa Wood once was measured as low as 22 on the Jenka scale. The Jenka scale is a test that measures hardness. Hardness is a property of wood that relates to its deformation, such as scratching, denting, and abrasion. In 1906, a wood researcher named Gabriel Jenka wanted a way to measure the hardnesses of different wood species and compare them to one another. So he developed this scale, and the technique was simple. You just take a steel ball and you depress it into wood under a press until the diameter of the ball is pressed exactly down to the halfway point. The ball has a diameter of 11.28 millimeters, and it's made such that the cross-section of the area is 100 square millimeters when it hits the halfway point. And the numbers are simply reported in pounds of force, so that one particular sample of Buloke took 5,060 pounds of force to depress that ball to the halfway point, and the lightest specimen of balsa that was ever tested took 22 pounds of force to depress that same ball to the halfway point. So what's the value of having a wood species that's so very hard? Its uses go back forever. The native aboriginals used it for clubs and weapons, and they even used Buloke sticks for digging because they were so hard and durable. When European settlers came to Australia, it was used for fence posts, for tool handles. It was even used to build barns with, and it was used, like the piece that I have, for foundations for some homes. A little bit later, it became a very popular wood for flooring because, again, it was virtually indestructible. It resisted scratching and denting. It was also used for several types of furniture, and it was even fantastic long-burning firewood and made excellent charcoal. Today it's prized by woodworkers who can get a hold of it because it makes a fantastic turning wood. It takes a really beautiful polish and shine. It makes great knife handles, and it's just neat to hold a piece of wood that has such fantastic grain structure and oftentimes is very old. Holding a piece of 400-year-old wood isn't a very common thing. Which brings me to the next piece of wood that I've got, which is Black Ebony. I had to have a handle that was fitting for the Buloke head, and this ebony is going to be the one to do it. This is Black Ebony. You've probably heard of types of wood like Gabon ebony or Macassar ebony, and there are a number of different types and a lot of ebony substitutes like African blackwood. They're all beautiful, but this particular ebony was the very first one that was ever popularized. The heartwood is almost entirely pitch black all the way through, no visible coloration in the grain at all, and it's rock hard, has an extraordinarily tight grain, and it just takes on a natural shine. You can sand it with sandpaper down even just to 220, and the wood just starts shining on its own. This particular species, Diospyros ebenum, is considered the most valuable hardwood in the world. In fact, a single tree can be worth over $1 million. It's also considered the rarest hardwood lumber species in the world, and one of the reasons for that is that it can take 150 years to mature. I, of course, didn't pay any ridiculous prices for it. I bought this piece in the 1980s. I actually have several pieces of wood from back then, and that was probably 15 years before the wood was even classified as threatened, much less endangered, like it is today, and it was easier to purchase, and you could buy and sell and trade this stuff all over the world. Today, of course, you can't do that. I think it's important to note that even though I am a woodworker who enjoys working with wood species that are exotic, sometimes rare or unusual species, that I fully support everything that CITES and the IUCN does with regards to conservation of wood species around the world, and I would never buy a species that's considered endangered or even threatened for that matter. I often get comments on my videos where people are saying, how dare you use this tropical hardwood or these exotic rare species that you use. You're threatening the world and the global environment and stuff by using and promoting species like this, and that's just not the case at all. A lot of the stuff that I bought 20, 30, and 40 years ago was in huge abundance. Stuff that you can't buy today because it's threatened, because it's endangered, and I have no problem using stuff that I bought back then. If I could take this piece of ebony and stick it back in the ground and grow an ebony tree with it, I'd do that in a heartbeat as opposed to turn something with it, but you can't really do that. I do fully support conservation efforts, and I think there's a lot that we can do to ensure the growth of trees today. I know if I buy certain wood species, that a lot of it, like teak for example, is farmed. It's actually, people have these giant farms, they grow the teak, they harvest and sell it. It's a sustainable resource, and there are a lot of places where you can buy wood that you can get from sources like that are just fantastic. You don't have to go into old growth forests and take wood out of those. I remember when I was much younger and foolish, I thought I could own, one piece of wood from every species in the world, and then I think I came upon the realization once that there's about 70,000 different species, and so I realized I would never achieve that dream. But I do have a lot of different species of wood, and I really have no problem using the stuff that I have now. But like I said, I would never go out and go after species that are threatened or endangered today. Moving to the opposite end of the hardness spectrum, our next hammer is made entirely from balsa wood. And unlike the previous species, balsa is not endangered, but today it's farmed. The less hard and dense a species is, the faster it seems to grow. And balsa wood can grow from seed to harvestable in as little as 5 years. And some people might find it surprising, but balsa is also a hardwood. Almost 600 years ago, the term hardwood was coined. Before we had botanical classifications, woods that were hard to chop down because of their hardness or density were termed hardwoods. Then, around 300 years later, in the mid-1700s, a Swedish botanist named Carl Linnaeus created a system for classifying and naming all living things. This is the same naming system we use today, and the term hardwood is not a botanical classification. Instead, what the bulk of the trees that had these characteristics in common was that they were angiosperms, which means that it is a flowering plant that produces its seeds within an enclosed fruit or nut. Most of them are harder and denser than non-hardwoods, but certainly not all. And balsa is the best example of all of them because it's the softest wood of all, and yet it's still a hardwood. Conversely, and quite interestingly, the Pacific yew is a softwood, and the Pacific yew tree scores on the Jenke scale at 1,600 pounds of force. Compare that to white oak, which is a really hard wood, which only scores about 1,360. So even though it's not a botanical classification, the term hardwood and the term softwood are still in wide use today. It's just important to know that they don't always mean a hardwood and they don't always mean a softwood. In fact, it's just a common name, but common names are really powerful. We use them all the time for everything, rather than the biological classification or the botanical classification, because it's just something we've grown used to doing. In fact, the word tree itself is not even a botanical classification. It just pertains to us as a certain subset of plants that shares common characteristics. Balsa wood has a lot of uses both today and historically. In my mind, the most famous use of balsa wood was by Thor. He was a famous Norwegian explorer and ethnographer. Ethnography is a branch of anthropology that studies cultures, and he strongly felt that the white-skinned Tiki people of South America were culturally very strongly related to people in Polynesia. In fact, he was confident that people had went from South America to Polynesia, which is a distance of nearly 5,000 miles, way back in prehistory, which should have been impossible. So he set out to prove it. He traveled to South America with a team, and hired additional people there, and decided to make a raft and see if he could float from South America all the way to Polynesia. Of course, he built the raft out of all balsa wood logs and native materials, and he did it in an indigenous style from drawings that he got that were made by the conquistadors. He kept everything primitive to prove it could have been done in pre-Columbian times. He named the raft the Kon-Tiki after an Inca god, and he succeeded. After 101 days on the water, he traveled nearly 5,000 miles and landed in Polynesia. He came back, wrote a book about it, called the Kon-Tiki, and made a documentary film about it, which won an Academy Award in 1950. The most important part, of course, is that it was made of balsa wood. The U.S. military also used balsa pretty extensively, especially during World War II. One of the more notable examples is the de Havilland mosquito, which was made with a considerable amount of balsa wood. And of course, every kid today has probably had a balsa wood airplane. In fact, a lot of adults get into the act too with larger scale airplanes, and I know I did. I know I always say in our videos when we make these and on the website that all the hammers that we make out of exotic woods are perfectly safe and perfectly fine to use. You know, they'll last forever. They're very, very rugged. I'm not sure that would apply to these. I think the rarity of the wood in the first one, between the Buloke and the Black Ebony, probably a little rare for everyday use and might be something more of a keepsake. And then of course the balsa wood certainly wouldn't stand up to anything at all. I hope you guys enjoyed watching the video and hearing a little bit about the different species, especially since these are not woods that you typically see in a workshop setting. These hammers will not be a part of my collection. I'm actually giving them as a gift to a very good friend and really good supporter of the channel. He's been with us, I think, practically since the beginning. I hope he'll enjoy them. He has a number of other hammers of ours on his wall already, so hopefully he can find some room for these to go along with those. And that's going to wrap up this video, and thank you all for watching.